Hi, Roger. Can you hear us?
Ali zaprete vrata vhodna?
Yes. Speak, baby.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Roger.
Ne, join moraš tu.
Jaz tudi mislim, da moraš joinati.
A tle?
Tle, ja.
A ja, tu.
Ne, ti kako se ne.
Hi.
Ti zeleno moraš podpisati.
Tu, ja, vidim tu.
Zeleno.
Hi, Roger.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
You hear
yeah.
me?
Oh, hey. I'm sorry, we had some technical problems. Huh?
I thought it was going to be a silent communication session.
Yeah, sorry. So thank you for being with us tonight. Here are some activists from the Slovene Youth for Climate Justice movement. And some other interested people that I hope will become activists shortly, maybe after this call. So we have just watched the documentary Disobedience, and I've briefly described Extinction Rebellion and the International Rebellion Week that you had. So could you explain why mass participation in civil disobedience is the sensible political route, and how did Extinction Rebellion start?
All right, okay. Well, hello everyone anyway. It's very nice to speak to you all. Thank you very much for spending time on this call. That's great, thank you. And I'll try and, I've had a bit of a long day, so I don't know how coherent I'm going to be, but I'll try my best, and I'm sure you can ask me some interesting questions if I don't get it quite right. So, what were the two questions again? Like, why mass participation, civil disputes is good, and how did Extinction Rebellion start? Was it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Just in case you don't know, my name is Roger Hallam. I'm a researcher at King's College in London. I research effective radical political change, and spent like 30 years off and on in participatory movements and what have you. I'm an organic farmer, and I helped do the strategic work for Extinction Rebellion in the UK, amongst other things. And I was one of the originators of Extinction Rebellion last January. I wrote a paper about it to argue that mass participation, civil disobedience is a good idea, and that's what would get things on the go in terms of climate change activism. And before that, the network that started off Extinction Rebellion was called Rising Up. And the origins of Rising Up was basically a number of workshops I did on effective political action for climate change activists. A year or so before that, actually, and they went very well. And we basically got together a bunch of academics and activists who were concerned that after 30 years of climate change activism, we weren't doing that well, to put it euphemistically, and we needed to think in fundamental ways about why activism hadn't worked and how it could work. So we started off with a really big questions, if you see what I mean, because if we carry on failing, then we're all going to be dead. So it's a massively important question, and we need to look at it seriously, and we need to be honest with ourselves about what works and what doesn't work. So one of the major, there's a number of things you can ask me about on it, I suppose, but yeah, one of the major things was mass participation, civil disobedience. But anyway, just to let you know, like, the research we did was very practical. So we did a number of campaigns in London that involved people getting arrested and went to prison and what have you. And so our research was very hands-on. And so that when we got to the point of doing Extinction Rebellion, we sort of worked with each other for a year or so. and we sort of knew what we were trying to do. And the origins of Extinction Rebellion are that January meeting. I did a paper for it, and in April, 15 people met in a cafe, a bit like you guys, about a similar number. And we had this mad idea of rebelling against the British government, which no one had done for 100 years or two. And then we started doing talks, as you may know. So one of the big innovations was not to go to the sort of activist groups or NGOs, but actually to talk to ordinary people. So I'd like to emphasise that at every point, really, that you guys are cool and you want to talk to other guys that are like you that are cool. But the name of the game is to get out and talk to people who aren't like you, and that brings in a far wider sort of cultural group. So so that's the origins of it. And as you may know, we blocked some bridges in London last November, and it sort of went global. And there's exile groups in about 100 countries, and we're all trying to work together with some difficulty, but that's the plan. So I hope that's a good enough answer. And in terms of mass participation, civil disobedience, there's 4 or 5 key things that Extinction Rebellion has done, which arguably has made it successful. I mean, obviously it could have been a lot more successful, and obviously as the climate change situation gets worse and worse, then it's not complicated to realise that people will rebel against their destruction at some point. So that always helps in terms of creating a social movement, that you've actually got something terrible to talk about. But obviously, like, not much was happening, and our main point, I guess, is that mass participation civil disobedience works, and the reason for that is, and there's a number of reasons, I guess. One of them is that breaking the law, which civil disobedience means, basically creates a drama. So if you're in Civilne, and you go on a march, you've probably all been on marches, everyone feels great about it, but at the end of the day, no one really gives a toss, no one cares, because you haven't really done anything that is going to create public interest or drama. So the idea is to break the law, and that means, or half break the law or almost break the law, means variations on the theme, and that brings in the press and the state authorities and gets the general public looking at you. So that's why civil disobedience works, and the mass participation side is a simple point, really, which is the more people do it, then obviously the more effective it is. So if there's only like 5 of you lying down in the road, no one really cares, but if there's like 10,000 people lying down in the road, then obviously it becomes a major thing. And so a lot of what Extinction Rebellion does is try to work out ways in which we can create a mass movement, which I guess in some ways is the biggest change from traditional climate change activism, which tends to be more like concerned with traditionally like having the right attitudes and believing the right things, rather than the actually mobilizing lots of people. And those two things aren't necessarily opposed to each other, but there's ways in which things need to change if you want to mobilize people who aren't just your mates. You see what I mean? How about that? Was that okay?
Yeah, great.
Is everyone okay still? Good.
So,
good.
Yeah, we've seen you managed to mobilize loads of people, especially during the International Rebellion Weeks. And how do you judge the success of your actions? You've probably done an assessment as to the preconceived objectives. What is your take on what happened during the 2 weeks?
Well, I should say, like, having an effect is a bit what's called in the literature non-linear, which is, you can be doing loads of great things and nothing really happens, and then you reach a point where something does happen, and then everyone thinks, there was something magical about that point, but there probably wasn't. So you know, like either the leader of the Labour Party in the UK meet you or he doesn't. Do you see what I mean? So the success of it, I suppose, was that we put the police in a position where they had to arrest people. In London, the police don't like arresting people, partially because it's quite expensive and they haven't got much money, and partially because, you know, being Britain is reasonably civilised. But so we had to design the rebellion so that the police would arrest us, but we didn't want to make it so full on that they were going to start hitting people. So we got that sort of balance right. So by being non-violent and just sitting in the streets for days on end, made them arrest lots of people. So that resulted, as you probably know, in 1,000 arrests in about 7 days. So that was the biggest number of arrests in modern British history since the Second World War. So as a result of getting to that point where it was bigger than anything else, then obviously the media was very interested in it, not least because it was in the capital city. And then that basically, the arrest basically created the political response. So the political response was that the politicians declared climate emergency in the UK, and politicians came to talk to us on the right and the left. And that's as far as it went, of course. So you can make a calculation that, you know, if 100 people get arrested, then, you know, nothing's going to happen. If 1,000 people get arrested, the politicians will come and meet you and say nice words about you, but you might have to have 10,000 people getting arrested to actually sort the whole thing out. So, you know, obviously, yeah, people take this. So that brings us back to having to bring a lot of people into the movement, which I can talk to you about if you like.
Yes, please do. So yeah, what are the main strategies for rallying people? I think we're very interested in that.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're interested in it, because that's all I'm interested in. Because and being interested in it is probably the biggest step, because a lot of people, you know, join political groups because they want to feel good about how right they are, if you know what I mean. Because you're in a room with people that agree with you, and it's great, and you all look great, and I look great, and we're all having a great chat, and, you know, the bad guys are really bad, and we're really good, and, you know, we all feel great, and nothing ever changes, right? But at least we feel great about it. Do you see what I mean? So we all know that because, you know, we've all been in groups like that. So the biggest change is to actually be interested in actually changing things, as opposed to just feeling that you're right. So once you make that step, that's probably about 50% of the process, because you're actually looking at the right issue. If you actually want to survive as a human species, basically the number one issue is how we're actually going to create political change, right? So the question is not why we're right, the question is how to create change. Okay, so once you've asked the right question, then, as I said, the thesis of Extinction Rebellion is mass participation. Creating a mass movement is where it's at. So that's the next step. So that's a little bit of a no-brainer, right? You know, you're not going to change the world with, you know, you 20 people in that room, right? You're just not going to do it. I'm sure you're all great and everything, but with all due respect, you're not going to do it, okay? So what you need in Slovenia, I don't know, how many million people are there? About 4 million people, is that something like that?
2 million.
2 million,
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, you probably can do it just with everyone in your room then. That's it. Yeah, that's fantastic. God, what a great country. 2 million people, love it. Great. Okay, so that makes it a lot simpler, actually. Yeah. So.
Lahko veš.
Literature says that great change happens in little countries. I don't know if you know that, right? I think before the French Revolution, I think the Swiss had a revolution first of all, like about 2 years before the French Revolution or something. I don't know. So the Swiss basically started it off because they were small and they did it all the rich people first. You see what I mean? And I think in 2012, in Iceland they had a little revolution. I don't know if people know about this. And they got rid of the government. But there was only 250,000 of them, so it was quite straightforward. And they had a good go at creating a new constitution and everything, and then they got, like, you know, didn't quite get there. So I think Slovenia is probably next up as the primary country to actually bring about some structural political change. There's no pressure, of course, but we are all looking at you.
Iza, lahko mogoče sam poveš, koliko jih je v Ljubljani, pa tako, koliko jih je prišlo na protest.
How do you do that? Okay, so obviously I'm not going to go into vast detail, okay, so it's going to sound a little bit simplistic, but these are the key points. So I've sort of already said one, which is, I know this is really uncomfortable to hear, but you simply are not going to bring about structural political change unless you get out and talk to normal people, right? And that's really difficult because normal people tend to be like not very politically nice, if you see what I mean. So you have to put up with people having attitudes which are a bit different to you. But people do change very quickly, and a lot of people are shitting themselves about climate change. You know, particularly people that aren't like you. So for instance, like I was talking to some like middle class students in Istanbul, right? So, you know, they're all great guys, you know, they're doing their stuff. But the fact of the matter is that a major demographic of people that are concerned about climate change in Turkey are like peasants in the east of Turkey. You see what I mean? They're people that are really concerned about it. So you have to get out and go and talk to these peasants. So it's going to be quite difficult. But all revolutions have basically been based upon people going out and talking to ordinary people and not having a sort of arrogant attitude, obviously, and learning from them because, you know, these people have got good ideas. So I would suggest that you split Civilne into sort of like 20 sections and then go and do a talk in those 20 sections. I don't know whether they're counties or towns or cities, right? So at your next meeting, you get the map out and you say, right, you know, there's nothing happening in that town. Someone goes to that town, you find out a few radical people or green people or whatever, they create a Facebook page or put it on social media, and you go and do the talk. And maybe only like 10 people turn up, but it doesn't matter. Because out of those 10 people, you'll find like 3 people that actually networked into that community. Do you see what I mean? And they'll say, okay, this is cool. We'll go and do another talk in 3 weeks in this town. And because they're insiders and they're part of that community, the following meeting, they might bring like 50 people. Do you see what I mean? So for instance, like in Oxford, in the UK, you know, it's quite a middle-class place, but, you know, we did a talk. The first talk I did there was 8 people, right? And then we went out and did various things. And I think before April, there was another talk there, and I think 100 people turned up. And like last week, we did another talk there, and 500 people turned up. You see what I mean? So you mustn't be put off just if 4 people turn up. You just have to. So the rule of thumb is you have to persist at it, right? There's no point like going, oh God, that doesn't work. You just have to keep at it. And obviously, you've got an amazing mobilizing message, which is everything's fucked, and you know things have to change. Do you see what I mean? So it's not like, you know, this is a big deal. So, you know, and that's what's happened in the UK. So that's 50% of your project. Okay. So don't go and talk to the NGOs. That's a waste of time. Don't go and talk to other left-wing groups. You know, because they're just going to come in and be miserable and what have you, and tell you where you're going wrong. What you want to do is get out and talk to normal people who are like action-orientated, and then you've got a genuine community-based business. And it's really exciting because meeting different people is good. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you've got all these people coming to your meetings, unless you're actually engaging in civil disobedience, they'll start wandering off again. Because it gets really boring, as you know, sitting around in meetings discussing how you're going to discuss things about how you're going to discuss things, if you see what I mean. So you've all been in meetings like that, right? So what you want to do is say, whoever's got an action, they can go and do it. So this is called post-consensus. So instead of having everyone sitting down, you know, maybe, what's the capital of Slovenia? Sorry, I'm not very good.
Ljubljana.
Yeah, that one. I'm really bad on pronunciation, I do apologise. It's because I'm English, not very clever. So you might say, someone says, okay, we're going to go block some roads in the centre of the capital, right? And then someone else says, well, you know, maybe you should think about that a bit more, and someone's got a problem with it, but they're not at the meeting tonight, and maybe you'll talk about it next week. Do you see what I mean? You know how this works. So what we've discovered in Extinction Rebellion in the UK is you don't have to wait until Jack comes to the meeting next week. You can just say, look, you know, me and 5 other people want to go and sit down the road in the capital, and we're just going to go and do it. And they can. So that's the essence of Extinction Rebellion, is this post-consensus process. So even if you think it's a silly idea, and it might be a silly idea, right? I mean, you know, whatever, doesn't matter. If you're going to like create an action-based culture, then you have to have a post-consensus culture, which is, unless someone's doing something that is obviously like harmful to the movement, like, you know, doing something like hitting someone in the face, let's say, that's not a good idea, then, you know, they can go and do it. So, so the second thing is to create a culture where people can go and do stuff. And doing stuff means that people are, you get more committed to the cause through doing stuff, not by talking about it. So then the name of the game is to have an interaction between those two things. Do you see what I mean? So you go and do the talks, you get 300 people to sit down the road or whatever you're going to do, and then that gets some publicity, you do a video of it, you go and do some more talks with the video, people say that's cool, and then next time around you're going to do it with 500 people, you see what I mean? And once you've got up to about 1,000 or something, because you're in a small country, you can bring down government or do whatever constructive things you want to do, and then off you go. So yeah, that's the broad framework.
Well, I think that our position here might be a bit different. So we would really have to think about this strategy, because in March, on the 15th of March, we organized a protest in Ljubljana. This is basically how this movement came to be. And there was around, I think, 7,000 students that came to the protest. It was really, really massive. It was like connected to Fridays for Future, the Global Day of Action. And also it was in some other Slovenian towns and cities. And then we started going out, talking to people, doing talks in different cities, or just like small villages. And we also had one time where only 3 people showed up, and times when 50 people showed up. But I think we're all right now in this kind of boring phase where there's a lot of meetings and a lot of talking and not a lot of actual ideas.
Not a lot of doing.
Yes, of like what to do now. Because here also the situation is that we actually managed to get into the parliament really quickly with the protest. We had a talk with the Prime Minister and with the President of the Parliament. But I can see why like small countries can make maybe big changes, but also the idea of the politicians here is that we're too small to have any impact with our decisions, with our policies. You know, we're just a part of the massive European Union. We can't do anything. So they basically say, yes, we hear you, we know about climate change, but you know, what can we do?
Well, the funny thing is, of course, is they say the same thing in Britain. You know, we're just a little country, which is bollocks, of course. But so I think it's actually the other way around. Which is, you're actually, I do mean seriously, you're a very interesting country, and I'm not just saying that to be nice, okay? You're a very interesting country, because small countries, as we've seen historically, can actually like prototype like rebellious and revolutionary like episodes. Do you see what I mean? So, because you can get away with it. Do you see what I mean? Like, in the UK has got, you know, it used to have a big empire, there's a big ruling class, and actually trying to do something really like impressive is actually quite difficult because there's a lot of people that like to stay in control. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's not to say we're not trying, okay? But in a smaller country, there's less confidence. The ruling class, or whatever you want to call them, like the political elite, have less confidence because they're not so big. So this is why this thing happened in Iceland and, you know, in Switzerland. So instead of looking upon yourselves as particularly powerless, in actual fact, you've probably got more power than we have in the UK. And the reason for that is because in the sociology of rebellion, as it were, there's this thing called the demonstration effect. The demonstration effect goes like this. If you took over the parliament, let's say, and, you know, got the government to enact a whole load of dramatic climate policies, you know, like making electric cars, you know, like banning vehicles, you know, a whole host of things, then people in other countries would go, they did it in Slovenia, so we can do it too. Do you see what I mean? So, for instance, like in the in the Arab Spring, the revolution, as you know, started off in Tunisia, right? So Tunisia was like the Slovenia of the Arab world. Do you know what I mean? It's like no one really cares about like Tunisia, but because it started off in Tunisia and it went away, then obviously like loads of other people in the Arab world went, hey, you know, if the Tunisians can do it, so can we. You see what I mean? And so it's, as you know, it spread to Egypt and what have you. So that's one thing to say is that I think seriously speaking, you've got a vital role to play. And it sounds, I'm very interested in your country for that reason. That's why one of the reasons I thought I'd be on the call, because it sounds like you've got a climate change movement which could get to a tipping point in terms of the government, okay? So I think, you know, in my view, obviously it's entirely up to you what to do, but in my view, the thing to do would be to create a dilemma-esque demand of the government. So I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of dilemma actions, but a dilemma demand, basically, you can make some demands of the government, like the minister comes to see you, right? Well, the minister will come and see you, but it doesn't mean shit, right? It's just like, who cares, right? He's going to come and see you. You probably know that, like politicians love to see you because it doesn't have to do anything, right? But you don't want to be asking for some, you know, massive revolution and everyone's going to be in collective farms or something. Do you see what I mean? Like, that's just not going to work. So you want to be asking something where they're going to be in a dilemma and then go and commit mass civil disobedience in order to get that. So, for instance, it could be that the country commits to zero emissions by 2025, but that might be too full on. So, like in the UK, we've got these intermediate demands that we want no expansion to any airports and we want an end to fracking, because there's fracking in the UK. So both of those are politically possible, right? Do you see what I mean? So you could go to the government and say, we want you to do X, Y, and Z, and if you haven't done them by, you know, the end of June or something, then we are going to come into the capital city and close it down for 2 weeks. You've got to be ambitious, right? And that will galvanise you. I mean, you know, you might decide something else. It doesn't really matter what you decide. I mean, it's your call. But the point is you need to choose something that's within your capacity as a movement, but it's also really ambitious, okay? So, like in the UK, like we were going, okay, we're going to, you know, close down four areas of the city, right? Well, a lot of people said, oh, no, that's really ambitious. You can only do one. But we thought, right, there's a climate emergency. Fuck it, we're going to do it anyway. Do you see what I mean? So we took that risk. And ironically, once you say something really ambitious to people, then they get inspired. Do you see what I mean? So if you say, look, we're going to close down the whole capital of Slovenia, right? You go around the country saying that, people are going to get excited. because it's something big and real, and you know, it's not like, hey, we're going to have a demonstration for a day. So obviously there's a balance. So that's what my advice would be. And obviously you need to get together in a room and with a facilitator, knock about some ideas, you know, and spend a weekend over it and say, right, we're going to decide on this big action, which will have these demands. And that will give you a sense of direction. Now, having said that, of course, like, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing little things. So in the UK, we have this separation between movement building actions and the full-on national actions. Do you see, if you see what I mean? So movement building actions aren't aiming to change the world. What they're aiming to do is to give people the confidence to do political action. So, you know, you might be in a provincial city, right? And you might say, okay, on Saturday, we're going to, you know, go and hand out leaflets and sit on the steps of the town hall. Do you see what I mean? For half an hour. And no, that's never going to change anything, but it just gives people a good feeling they've worked together and what have you. So in the UK, we're going to be closing down the centre of cities for a day in about a month. And that's to force the local councils to declare a climate emergency. So it's not a national action, but you can see it builds up the confidence of people in the towns around the UK. It makes them feel good about themselves. And then, of course, they're ready to say, yes, we'll come down to London. So that would be the strategy I would suggest, is do these movement building things and then get together, everyone's in the room, go through some process whereby everyone feels the decision is legitimate, or at least there's a critical mass of people that think it's legitimate, and then go for something that's like about 5 times more ambitious than you think is ambitious, okay? So something that you're going to feel is like pretty unrealistic, but you just go for it. So that's my
Thanks. So you mentioned declaring a climate emergency. So yeah, we saw that UK declared the climate emergency, the UK Parliament and Ireland, but we also had a discussion in the movement, like what does that mean? Who decides what does it mean? What does it mean for you? And what's the strategy on defining this term?
Yeah, well, the fact of the matter is, it doesn't mean anything at all. So, sorry about that. But what it does mean is they've accepted that they're complicit in the destruction of the next generation. So it sets them up for political defeat. So in itself, it doesn't mean anything, because as I'm sure you're aware from politicians all around Europe, they love to say things that sound dramatic, as long as it doesn't mean anything. So what we're working towards is we're getting the government to declare climate emergency, and then we've got a plan, for instance, to close down Heathrow Airport, okay? So when we close down Heathrow Airport, which is a massive undertaking, it's the biggest airport in Europe, I think, then we'll be saying to the courts and to the government, if this is the climate emergency and the next generation are going to die due to putting carbon into the atmosphere, you have a moral and legal obligation to not engage in like carbon-intensive projects, because they're going to have a new runway at Heathrow, which is like a massive project. And politically, they're on very difficult ground because they've already accepted as a climate emergency. Do you know what I mean? So it's not like they're saying, you know, in the old days, if some of you have been in climate activism for 10 years, you know, like 10 years ago, people used to be saying, yeah, the climate's a little bit of a problem, but, you know, blah, blah, blah. Well, now, if they're saying there's a climate emergency, basically that means, like, all you people are going to be dead in 30 years. Do you see what I mean? I mean, it's, like, serious. So it's a bit like they haven't really politically got a leg to stand on. So that's the strategy around getting people to declare climate emergency. So in the local councils, we're working on this thing at the moment, that we get a council to declare climate emergency, and they all think they're very happy and, you know, what have you. And then we give them a piece of paper that says within 60 days, they've got to transform their policies as the council. and they're really dramatic demands like insulating all the houses in the town, something like that. And then the council's going to say, no, we can't do that, right? And then what we're going to say is, yes, you've got to do that, otherwise we'll come and occupy your council. So you can see how you get an escalation of action. And we're hoping that some of the councils in a year or so will start going into civil disobedience against central government, which obviously is what rebellion means. So, you know, that's the idea.
I saw that you were acquitted of all charges lately, and that you stated in front of a jury that maybe you could explain what exactly happened, but I heard you were talking about exactly the climate emergency, and I'm a law student, so I'm interested. Do you think this case, the development in this case, will mean something for like future similar cases, and will change the case law in the UK? If you could explain a little bit what exactly happened and how you think this will influence.
Yeah, well, what you should all know is that I'm a criminal. So, you know, maybe you shouldn't be listening to me, but I'm definitely a criminal in the eyes of the judiciary. So, well, I take that as a compliment in this context. But, I mean, I don't know whether you have a jury system in your country, do you?
No, we have a continental system,
Yeah, well, you need to have a revolution, because we had a revolution in the 13th century, and we said to the king we were going to kill him if he didn't allow people to have juries to decide whether their countrymen were innocent or not. It's called the Magna Carta. So it's quite handy. So that's my main advice, is to have a revolution on it. But that aside, yeah, basically how the British legal system works is if you do something not so bad, you go to a magistrate and they decide whether you're guilty or not. But if you do something really bad, like go and put paint on the wall of a big Gothic hall in an elite university like I did, and cause £7,000 worth of damage and cause a big hoo-ha, then the great thing about being really bad is you get to go to a big court called the Crown Court, and in the Crown Court you have the honour of putting your case to a jury of, I think it's like 14 ordinary people selected by sortition. So in this particular court case, which went on for 3 days, the judge was very adamant that we put paint on the wall. And as you all know, putting paint on the wall is a bad thing. And it should be a crime, and if it's a crime, then it should be punished and you should be found guilty. So the judge spent 3 days trying to convince the jury that that was all there was to it. But obviously the jury were quite intelligent, like most normal people, and realised that we didn't put paint on the wall just because we were bad people. Well, not because we were bad people, but because we were trying to make a political point. And they accepted that we had what's called a right of necessity. So again, I don't know, I think in most European law they have a right of necessity, right?
Yeah.
Which is, you know, if a house is burning, then it's okay to smash the window to get in to save the baby, right? No one's going to take you to court for smashing the window. So usually it's a very sort of philosophical sort of thing, you know, that you probably study at university. But like there is a good case for saying, obviously, that you could cause damage in order to stop substantial bigger damage. And that would be your argument if you go to court, maybe in Slovenia as well, is to argue that you know you were disturbing the traffic because you were trying to stop a bigger crime, which was a catastrophe. Obviously, that really before me, okay, because civil resistance works. But whether your judiciary will agree with it, who knows? But obviously, that's what you find out. Yeah, that's what happened.
Congratulations. So,
Yeah, thank you very much.
questions from the audience?
I don't know, can you hear me or?
Stand up and
Okay.
talk really loud.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to shout now, I hope you can hear me. So my question would be, can you elaborate a bit on what are the logistics of a civil disobedience action? Because it's probably not just about people chaining themselves to something, but there's probably also some media work going on behind the scenes. So what are the concrete logistics of civil disobedience action, like stopping the traffic or stuff like that?
Did you hear,
You-
Roger?
You mean specifically on stopping traffic, did you say?
Or just
Or just
one
generally?
example, yeah, or in general.
Sorry?
Either of those, basically.
What?
Either.
Either like maybe one example or specifically stopping traffic.
Yeah, well, I should say, if you're interested in the details about how we've organised this in the UK, if you email me, I can pass you on to the action and logistics people that do the specific design work, if you see what I mean. And then you can have an hour conversation with them, because it is very important information. And obviously we're quite skilled at doing it because we've done it, 30, 40 times. So that's the first thing to say. But yeah, there's a number of different issues about stopping traffic, let's say, for the sake of argument. And obviously it might depend on which country you're in. But one of the things which is controversial but has worked in the UK, and I think it would work in Europe, is to go and see the police and tell them what you're going to do. So you might think this is sort of like a mad idea, but one of the interesting things about going to see the police is that it starts to build a relationship whereby they are less likely to use violence towards you, because they sort of know where you're at. And it's not because they're necessarily nice guys, it's more because they sort of can make an assessment of what's going to happen. And also, there's great value in humanising the relationship with the opposition. So I've had a big debate about this in the UK, as you may know. And we've tried to introduce people to the literature from the Global South, which says that if you can get the police and eventually the army on your side, then you're 60% more likely to succeed in terms of a rebellion or revolution. And the reason for that, of course, is that the people that control society only control society in so much as the police follow their orders. So it's not a matter of sort of being buddyish with them or agreeing with them or anything like that. It's a matter of trying to facilitate a predictable act of civil disobedience. So you sort of know what the police are going to do. You tell them what you're going to do. They tell you what you're going to do. And it sort of starts to develop into a productive relationship for both sides. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you're going to be blocking a road, the next group that are going to get pissed off are the drivers. So what we've evolved in the UK is that this is why you need some nice old ladies to join your movement that look respectable, because you can send the nice old ladies in amongst the cars with their cakes and cookies, and they can explain to the drivers, that you're not going to be there for very long, and this is just a peaceful protest, and would you like to have this chocolate cake or something? And again, you might think this is really not that important, but a lot of the micro design and actions is actually very, very important. And there's a big literature in social science that says if you give someone a gift, it's very difficult for them to be unpleasant to you, even if they don't accept it. So you might think this doesn't work, but it's actually super dramatic. And obviously, you don't really want someone getting out of their car sort of punching you or something. So it's great to have the old ladies go out, all the respectable-looking people, a lawyer, something like that, to go amongst the cars and say, terribly sorry for the delay. And also that shows that you are not there to antagonize people. So a lot of traditional left sort of protest is very antagonistic. If you're going to build a big movement and you're going to like neutralize like right-wing people, then you need to show respect to everyone concerned. So this stops them from demonizing you, because you've basically made clear that one, you're fearless because you believe in what you're going to do, you're going to block the road. But secondly, you're respectful to everyone. So this is very subversive. And the other thing, I guess, is that you have a banner, so it's clear that the cars aren't going to drive through the banner. And if you have got the police there, the police, generally speaking, you know, won't remove you straight away, and they'll be more concerned about public safety. But you'll have to see how that pans out, and maybe you've had an experience of that. And what we've done in the UK is we did this sort of system where we got on the road for 7 minutes, and then we got off the road for a few minutes. The pissed off drivers could drive off, because after about 100 meters behind you, they just think it's a you know, it's a traffic jam, if you see what I mean. And then you can go onto the road again. So that's good, like low-level civil disobedience action, and you're about to get arrested for it. Again, I don't know what your local police situation is. But what we did after that, of course, in April, was we went onto the road permanently. So sometimes, like, there's an arrest logic, and sometimes there isn't, right? So there's different reasons for doing actions, and it's important you understand why you're doing it. Are you doing it just to get a little bit of publicity? Are you trying to get arrests?